Welcome to Locally Speaking, a podcast where two elected officials chat about the municipalities and regional districts that make up local government in BC and how we manage to get anything done at all. I'm Brenda.
And I'm Alton.
And in today's episode, we talk about transition. New boards and new councils have just been elected all across our province. So how do they roll up their sleeves and get to work?
Legislatively speaking, the CAO is the only employee of any board or council, with all other staff reporting to them through general managers and other department heads. Boards may come and go, but the staff are always there for the transition, and we're fortunate enough to have with us as our first guest speaker, Dean McKinley, CAO of the Sunshine Coast Regional District. Dean, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to be in local government, and how long have you been with the SCRD?
First of all, thanks for having me on. Happy to be here, Alton and Brenda. Path to local government. I always say the paths are many, the truth is one. My path involved originally wanting to be a music teacher, and then suddenly realizing that the idea of teaching grade 8 kids how to play musical instruments was probably about as far from what I wanted to do with the rest of my life as possible. I ended up working in several provincial ministries, including at times, highways, back when it was highways, lands, tourism, forests. There might be others that I can't even remember. And I spent about 9 years with Northern Development Initiative Trust in Prince George. And that's where I actually got the bug to start to work in municipal government or local government, because with Northern Development, we work closely with 40 municipalities, 9 regional districts, 1 regional municipality, which is interesting in and of itself, and 88 First Nations. And we provided funding for a lot of the projects they'd have. And one of the ways we'd conspire to get funding out is each year I would meet with all of the CAOs that would meet with me, and we'd go through their 5-year capital plans. And we try to align their 5-year capital plans with projects we might be able to contribute funding towards, both Northern Development's funding and other potential sources of funding at the provincial and federal level to try to move them forward. And it was during one of those meetings where a long-serving CAO said, well, you should seriously think about joining municipal government. You know all the people already. You're kind of already up in our grill. And there's a shortage of people that really want to serve as chief administrative officers, so you should give it some thought. So I took the leap, 2017 in Mackenzie. I spent 3 years working in Mackenzie, which was just phenomenal. I decided and learned that I absolutely loved the job. And when the Sunshine Coast Regional District opening came open, it was now a job that I knew I now love in a place that I would absolutely love to live. That's kind of how I got here. And I was just saying at the meeting last week, it was actually 3 years ago last week when I met the SCRD board for my interview.
Wow, time flies.
It does fly.
That's a whole nother topic if we wanted to talk about emergency operations centers.
Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you. So you have new members on your boards. The SCRD had 4 acclamations this election, including 2 brand new candidates. And then you had 1 election in Half Moon Bay. So what comes next? How do you prepare yourself for that?
It's an interesting question. I think in reality, you probably start preparing quite a long time before the election. You certainly start preparing from a staff perspective as soon as you see who the slates of candidates are, which electoral areas or municipalities are actually having elections. As you mentioned, we had a number of acclamations, so there's some known quantities, people you're aware of who will be coming. And then you've got all these potential new people after the election. And before the election, we start planning what will be the orientation, in our case for a new board, in a municipality for the new council. But we're also trying to figure out and tailor that potential orientation based on how many people will be new. Orientation will look a lot different for a whole bunch of new people than for a whole bunch of returning people. So I think really it's just around being as prepared as we can be to welcome the new people here and try to be really clear about what new representatives on the board can expect and what the roles are between what staff does and what elected officials do.
Thanks for that. Is there a standard for the way that boards and councils receive their orientation and training? How did you come up with the orientation plan that you're looking to implement? This is in conjunction with the District of Sechelt and the town of Gibsons, and I don't know if there's other places that do it that way, but could you speak to that?
Sure. Actually, that's an interesting question too, because there's no one standard. There's no one unifying way one does an orientation. I would say what's universally true, if we're going to talk about orientations in BC, and probably elsewhere, is they're incredibly important. We know that much. We know that most orientations will cover certain subject matter, but the actual ways that they get done can vary greatly between place to place. And some of that is related to how many people are new. In the specifics of this one, what's really interesting is I'm not aware, although I haven't been doing this forever, there's other people who have been doing it longer, I'm not aware of a joint orientation before, which I'm really excited about.
Right.
I would say that we've put a lot of effort over the last term, even before my arrival, in trying to work more closely together as local governments on the Sunshine Coast. And that includes the Sunshine Coast Regional District, Sechelt, Gibson, and Shell, all trying to work more closely together and better together. And this seems to be a clear demonstration moving forward, setting the tone for this upcoming term, that Team Sunshine Coast approach, if that's what we want to brand it as, is something that we'd like to continue with. I think there's a lot of potential benefit from doing these orientations together, because some of it doesn't matter. There's no difference if you're in a municipal councillor or a regional district board member. Many of the things are going to be very similar. Other areas are highly unique to Sechelt, to Gibson's, to the Sunshine Coast Regional District. So there's no set formula. I'd say one of the things we try to do is we try to learn from what happened at previous orientations. I would say that some of the learnings that came out of the last orientation of the board was there was a lot of new members last time the board came together.
Yeah.
And you know, people will say it's like drinking from a fire hose is a fairly common expression. So I think as staff, there's so much information we're trying to impart and share and provide. Maybe sometimes less is more. Maybe we don't need to turn the fire hose on full blast. I think people can make a mistake thinking that the orientation is something that occurs over a 2 to 4 week period, and then we're done orientation and we get down to business. Maybe orientation isn't the right word. There's how we do our work together between staff and the board, or staff and council. As staff, we try to do continuous improvement. We try to learn what's working well. I think if we think of orientation that way as actually a 4-year process of learning how best to perform our functions together, that's probably a better way to do it. So I would say the philosophy for this year, from my perspective, as we look at what we're putting together, is we don't have to turn the whole fire hose on you guys at one time. We can actually chip away at it, hit you with the big stuff up front, the really high level things, and then just make it an ongoing process.
Yeah, it's a massive learning curve. I would say I didn't really start to feel super comfortable probably for 18 months after the election. Right. Yeah. And really only in the last year have I felt super confident in certain areas that I can speak to it without doubting myself or going back and double checking am I sure I understand this right? And so it's a massive learning curve. And so do you see that with a new council or a new board that there is a period where, I can use an analogy, they've got the training wheels off and then or the training wheels on, or there's a honeymoon period or whatever you want to call it. And some of that is defined by things that also happen that we have no control over. But generally speaking, is there a period of time from the time a new board starts until you feel like they're up and good to go?
It's an interesting question again. I think it really is dependent a lot on, again, how many people have been reelected again.
True, yeah.
What was their motivation for running? Right? That's do we have a level of understanding on the role of governance? Let's say there could be candidates coming to the regional district board that have been long serving on a municipality. They just weren't on the board before, or they've served on similar types of governance boards where they have a pretty solid understanding of the role of governance versus operations. Those are definitely factors. I would say in any new relationship, and I'll use myself as an example because it's not unlike what you're talking about in terms of a new board or council member. Coming in as a new CAO, you're coming into an established organization with an existing staff team and an existing team of elected officials. So learning your own place in the matrix of this organization and then trying to figure out how you can contribute to leading it forward, it takes some time. And in my case, I think it wasn't very long after I arrived. I mean, the day my moving truck arrived, after all the stuff got unloaded, we activated the Emergency Operations Center for the first of like 8 or 9 activations when I was here.
Yeah.
So, and then COVID hit. I would say that whatever that length of time is until everything started working in sync, in some ways I feel like we're just getting
getting there now.
Just getting our feet out from underneath us now. And so that's why I think this whole idea of looking at an orientation differently, there's the things you need to learn as a newly elected official. But your governance role, that's not a one and done. That's something that I think there's benefit in constantly working on it, constantly re-engaging, constantly talking about what's going well, how could we work together better, which is actually linked to that single employee model, right? So different people look at that relationship differently too. There's some local governments or some chief administrative officers that would be like, no, I'm the employee. You don't talk to anybody but me. Everything goes through your employee. I'll impart those messages to the rest of staff.
Right.
Other people have different philosophies. Mine has always been, well, your org chart for who you get to directly interact with is a little larger than that, right? And it includes the entirety of the senior leadership team who have sort of committed to that idea that the senior leadership team, with the CAO as the official conduit, works together with the board, each with different roles, operations and governance, but we've expanded the size of the team that works together to try to make it easier to have that relationship.
Without giving us too much in the way of specifics, has there been a transition that you know about or participated in that maybe didn't go so well? You know, I don't want to use the term disaster, but things can always go wrong.
I would say that in my previous local government experience, and even the 9 years I spent in Northern Development, which is very similar actually in structure to a local government. In fact, all of the regional advisory committees and the boards are made up of locally elected politicians. Either I've been lucky or I haven't been around long enough. But personally, I've not been involved in an orientation process that went poorly. In Mackenzie, it was different, municipality. Most of the people, when I was there for the re-election, there was only like one person that was new. Everybody else was either acclaimed or re-elected. I want to say it was only one person. So the orientation was pretty easy. There wasn't a lot. And the new person used to be a staff person.
Oh.
So they already intimately knew. They'd also worked in like 4 different departments within the district of Mackenzie. So it wasn't like they needed to be introduced. Heck, they worked in them.
Very personalized orientation for that individual.
So it was a pretty seamless transition. I wasn't around at the Sunshine Coast Regional District for the last round of orientations. I think I've been fortunate that for the most part, any of the transitions I've been involved in, the transitions themselves were really smooth, and the people that were elected just so happened that they were easy to work with from a staff perspective. They had a clear vision of where they wanted to go. They were willing to let staff try to take them there. So I don't personally have those disaster stories, but many people have them, and that's the reason why CAOs tend to get a little antsy around election time.
Since you brought that up, as really the single employee of the board, but not just you, staff below you, how much anxiety and stress is there around election time? Like, I can't imagine if I knew that my boss could potentially change every 4 years. How stressful is that for staff?
I think it can be really stressful. I think the stress is for a number potentially of different reasons, right? Some people are more change averse than others, so their level of stress is going to be high at the best of times. I think when we look at a new board or council coming in, and it's more stress with more turnover. So we had a number of acclamations that, I don't know if it takes the stress down, but it takes the unknowns down a little bit.
Right.
Lots of lead time.
Yeah, and you're dealing, if you know who you're working with to a degree, and we had a fair bit of certainty at the Sunshine Coast Regional District, even around some of the newly elected, were actually newly elected through acclamation. So you've got an opportunity to sort of gauge what that might mean. However, around election time, I mean, CAOs I always consider as kind of like hockey coaches. You know, when the new GM is hired or the new ownership takes over and they're going to clean house, they don't fire the whole team. They usually, sometimes they'll get rid of the GM. They'll often get rid of the coach, and they start from there. And I think, the numbers would say that between now and 12 months from now, 30 to 40% of CAOs will be in different places. Some because the new board came in and made a decision that it was time to part ways. Others might retire. Some retire earlier than they might have planned because they can see the writing on the wall, or they don't think the fit's going to be there. And that opens up this cascading series of opportunities for CAOs in other locations to go up to a larger community or move to a different part of BC. And by the time all the dust clears, 40 to 50 CAOs are different than they were 12 months ago. For senior staff, what's fascinating about that is not only are they working with a new series of elected officials, but they're dealing with a new CAO who might have a completely different style than a previous CAO. I'll give you an example. When I went to Mackenzie in 2017, I was the 4th CAO in 5 years.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
There were 5 CFOs over 5 calendar years. And when I was having my interview with the Mackenzie Council, that was a very typical interview. Then I had an interview with the senior leadership team. And one question I got specifically was, I want to know who you are, and I want to know if you got my back. We have had way too much turnover around here, and I don't think I can continue to break in new CAOs year after year. So tell me about you. Because
That's great.
And I love the fact that he asked
So
that.
honest.
Well, and it turns out that's just who that guy was.
Yeah.
He was amazing, right? Amazing guy to work with.
Yeah.
But for staff, like now you're getting a double whammy. You've got a new group of elected officials to work with. If they make the decision to get rid of the CAO, well, change was already coming. Now a tremendous amount of change is coming, not just at the elected level where we would expect the change to be, we were going this direction, we'd like you to take us this direction now. That's fine with the existing group. But when you say we'd like you to take us this direction now, and you've got a new leader, and then sometimes a whole new series of changes come. And that's where you really start to see, you'll see some places after a whole new set of elected officials come in, often when there's enough changeover, that's followed shortly after, if you follow Civic Info, by the Chief Financial Officer posting and the Human Resources Manager posting and the Infrastructure General Manager posting. And I think nowadays, when we think about it through that lens, it's so easy to be portable. I think these types of decisions, if a new elected board or council is going to come in, I would think they should be really careful about how quickly they pull the trigger on change if they haven't considered the other change that could occur as a result. Like, try to be really purposeful about it.
Right. People don't have to stay there if they feel it's going to be hostile or just anything. I mean, remote work from home, part hours.
Yeah.
If you don't like it here, you can work somewhere else, and you might even be able to work there part-time while you're figuring out the move.
It's never been more true, right? It's never been more true that you can work almost anywhere. So and that's not just from a, council or board be careful, how quickly you make a change. It's also internally to an organization, how we act as a senior leadership team about things. We treat people differently than we did, partly because it's right to treat people well, but also because people have other options.
Fair enough. We know that you've got a fairly friendly style in working with both the board, the councils, other senior staff. Do you think that's important for CAOs overall? Is that just something that you do? You know that there are maybe different ways of doing it that seem to work just fine for those CAOs? Like, how do you feel that works for you?
I think for me it works because that's who I am. I think, what I would say is that there's so many different ways to do this job. Right? There's so many ways to do the CAO job. I have been in the room talking to like 40, 50 CAOs where we're just talking about whatever comes up. And this is a question that comes up a lot. How much access do you give of yourself to your elected officials?
Right.
How much do you let them get to know you as an actual person? One of the reasons to guard access and to not have much of a relationship outside of purely work is self-protection. From a CAO standpoint, especially around election time, if it was thought that the existing CAO was just a crony or a buddy of the previous board, then that, from a CAO's perspective, can be a career-limiting move, let's say. Others would say that after 4:30, I got to guard my personal time. So you don't get my cell number, don't call me at night, don't expect me to return a call on the weekend, those types of things. Some people roll that way. Maybe because that's what works best for them. They need that time. My personal style just fits my personality. I tend to be available. Just because someone sends me a text on the weekend, I mean, I might not see it, but if I see it, I'll probably just answer it. I think I work better when I understand people, not just understand where they're coming from a why they might feel this way about an issue perspective, but if I understand a few things about at the core of them what's truly important and what their motivation is for serving, what their passions are, I feel like it makes it easier for me to understand decisions they might make or suggestions they might make. And I always feel like I work better with people that I can find a connection to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. Okay, a couple fun questions here to end us off here. So we have some boards and councils out there that have a lot of totally new people on them. Do you have any words of wisdom for those peeps?
First word of wisdom is hopefully you had more than one reason to run. Some people that decide to run because they're super passionate about one single issue, that can make a 4-year term as an elected official pretty dry when you realize that you're one vote of insert number of people that are on that board or council here, and you don't have the ability to drive any one issue by yourself. That would be one.
Yeah.
2, I would hope, and I guess this is advice for people before they choose to run. It's a little late now that they're elected.
Very early.
Yeah.
I hope that people would come into this with an open mind and understand that there are many perspectives. They're all valued. They're all valuable. That we bring our histories, we bring our thoughts, all of these things to the table as elected officials. But at the end of the day, whether we agree with the decision of the group or not, that is the decision of the group. Yeah. And so we make decisions as a group, and we live with those decisions as a group. I would hope that people see it as more of a team. One of the things, and we're not the United States in so many ways, thank goodness, but when I look at the state of their discourse south of the border, and I don't see it as much here, but it's always possible. I don't see it here on the Sunshine Coast, but now there's starting to be too many people in politics that see their role only as someone that is there to mess with the status quo, to disturb things, to be the loud voice of dissent. I would say, as in general in local government in BC, if there was one thing that can be really difficult for staff, especially now where it is hard to keep people, good people, it's not necessarily micromanaging, but it's similar to that. It's where a councillor board sees themselves the loyal opposition to staff.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a critical distinction. There is a loyal opposition in provincial politics. There's a loyal opposition in federal politics. The role of a loyal opposition is important, but it's not as productive or helpful in municipal governance. There is a role for having a different opinion, for sure. But when a board starts to see themselves, or a council starts to see themselves as that check and balance that is there to be the loyal opposition to staff, it goes beyond holding feet to the fire or asking questions to make sure that decisions are the right decisions from a governance perspective, and can be, frankly, incredibly deflating to the people that are trying to get the work done for you, when they feel like all their hard work and advice is simply nitpicked at every corner.
Yeah, that's a great perspective.
And that makes me think, do you have any words of encouragement for the staff that are going to have to teach some of these newly elected how to govern?
I'll speak to our staff team here. Mm-hmm. They don't need words of encouragement. We're pretty pumped, actually. We're pretty excited. Over the last 4 years, the relationship, my understanding, between the elected officials and staff has been building and is quite strong. Overall, in the Sunshine Coast local governments, and all of those local governments provide members to the Sunshine Coast Regional District Board, because we're working better and our relationships are stronger at the elected official level between the municipalities, the nation, and the regional district, and the staff relationships are stronger between all of the organizations, it actually makes this transition a little easier. We have enough momentum working together now that someone would have to go out of their way to pull it apart. Right. And I think it's harder to pull it apart than it is to put it together in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I would say, from a staff perspective, we're pretty excited. These have been a hectic 4 years. No one would have called some of the stuff that we've had to deal with or tried to, you couldn't have planned for it. But coming out the other side of it, I don't want to speak too soon, But potentially coming out the other side of it, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about how we work together. So I would say we're really looking forward to working with the new board. I think that we're realizing that, let's make this an ongoing work together. The whole idea of orientation and how we do governance together. Let's just not confine it to the beginning. Let's just work on it more purposefully and completely through the whole term.
Well, that's an interesting point because, you can't just learn for a couple of weeks and then know everything there is to know. We've got the Local Government Leadership Academy. We've got our various area association forums. There's so much learning along the way.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so here's a pie in the sky question. If you could snap your fingers and make it so, is there something you wish you could change about the way the Local Government Act and Community Charter are set up when it comes to regional districts?
There's probably Charter and Act geeks that are better at answering this question than me. One sits about 10 feet over in the next desk. But what I would say is one of the challenges for me moving from a municipality to a regional district, and this is a challenge that everybody that gets acquainted with the regional district has, is it's so siloed, right? Yeah. It's just so siloed. In a municipality, you can move money from here to pay for this. This shuffles over here to pay for that. And in a regional district, it doesn't work that way. And even when I first started with Mackenzie, I was working with the regional district of Fraser Fort George on certain things and learning, what do you mean you can't do that? And what their CAO told me was actually, Dean, the regional district model might be the finest example of democracy that we have. It is truly a democratic process where the only way anything happens is through a coalition of the willing. Everybody actually has to agree to work together to make anything work in a regional district. So there are times where it's incredibly frustrating that these silos prevent you from doing certain things. At the end of the day, all the services that are provided were agreed to by the residents that received them. They could have opted out. They can opt out at any time, I suppose, although that's a bit complicated too. But a regional district is a truly collaborative form of democracy. And that is actually really cool. When you think about it through the glass half full lens.
Right.
Glass half empty, we can sure be a pain in the ass sometimes.
Thanks for listening to Locally Speaking, a podcast where two local government officials chat about our regional districts and municipalities that make up local government here in British Columbia. If you aren't following our podcast yet, you can subscribe wherever you consume your podcasts. Maybe you have a topic suggestion for the show, or you want to come and chat with us about what's going on in your area of the province. Drop us a line at locallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com, and let's make it happen.
Locally Speaking is recorded on the traditional territory of the Sechelle Nation.